I want to thank Bob Smart for organizing this, bringing this great convention to Boston. He's put this event on in a number of cities out west. Now we got CannaCon in Boston. That's a good thing. So who am I? I'm John Dvorak, JD. I'm a hempologist. I've been studying cannabis hemp for more than 25 years. I've written for a bunch of different publications. I created a hemp history website, hempology.org. And I put together the Traveling Hemp Museum, which I have here today. A lot of different things that are made out of hemp. So I determined that we need more research into all aspects of the cannabis plant. So I created the Cannabis Curriculum, and I've given my talk to a bunch of universities and student groups all around the Northeast. Why am I here? I'm here because of Reefer madness. For over 75 years, our government has waged an all-out campaign demonizing the cannabis plant. They've made everybody ashamed that they use marijuana. They've made people think if you smoke a little marijuana, you're going to die or you're going to become a drug addict. They've created these campaigns, the Just Say No campaign, the This Is Your Brain on Drugs campaign. They've stigmatized an entire class of society just because we use a safe and effective herb to medicate and recreate. And if that's all they did, that would be bad enough. But they made it illegal, and they arrest 600,000 Americans every year just for possessing marijuana. It's insane. They've arrested millions of Americans over the years, destroyed our inner cities, broken up countless families. It's horrible. Gang violence that you hear so much about, that's directly related to people fighting over the profits made from selling drugs. Our government blocks research into medical marijuana. They stand in the way, and they won't even let our farmers grow hemp. It's horrible. So I want to turn Reefer madness into Reefer Gladness. Yeah, all right. Now you guys, all this huge crowd that's here today, y'all are all in on the secret, especially Ray and John. You are in on the secret, but I don't want to be preaching to the choir here. I want to preach to the preachers. I want you to go out there and let everybody know how great cannabis hemp is and how truly devastating its prohibition is. I usually give this talk to student groups, so I'm going to go through a bunch of different subjects and give them ideas for term papers, book reports, team projects. But you don't have to be in school. You can be a student of life. I learn something new about cannabis every day. There's just so much coming out about this great plant. And there's an infinite number of subjects to choose from related to industrial hemp, medical marijuana, or the drug war. So I'm going to go through those and plant a seed that will hopefully grow into a huge industry. A lot of people, though, they ask me, they say, well, what's the difference between marijuana and hemp? And it's a very confusing question, and it's a lot of conflation between the things. Marijuana has 8 to 20% THC in the flower. So people use marijuana for a social lubricant, to have fun, for medicine, therapeutic reasons, and also for religious reasons, some people. Whereas hemp has a very small amount of THC in the flower. By law, less than 0.3%. But you can make all sorts of great products out of hemp, including food, fuel, building materials, plastic, paper. But it's all the cannabis. It's the same genus. It's the same plant. Marijuana and hemp comes from cannabis. It has that familiar serrated leaf. They both have fibrous stalk. They both have the same root system, and the same seeds come from the same marijuana and hemp. It's all cannabis. So, and there's even a company out west called Restalk. They're taking the stalks from medical marijuana facilities and turning it into hemp. They used to just throw those stalks away. Now they're taking stalks and turning them into hemp from marijuana plants. So that's it's a little confusing, but it's all cannabis. We have to understand the linguistics of this. Cannabis sativa is the scientific name for this plant. And sativa is the Latin word for useful. So they used to call it useful plant. Now they call it the devil's lettuce, pot, dope, reefer. They rebranded it marijuana just to confuse people. But it's been used by almost every civilization on the planet, and Dozens of cultures have created their own name and word for hemp. And the Chinese even have their own symbol for hemp. It's up in the upper left-hand corner. That's a shed with 2 cannabis plants hanging upside down to dry. That's the Chinese symbol for hemp. So I'm not a big fan of tattoos, but if you want to get a hemp tattoo, that might be a good one. They also used to call it true hemp because there's a lot of other plants that you can make hemp fiber out of, like sisal and jute. But cannabis hemp was true hemp. And the word canvas is actually derived from the word cannabis. All the sailing ships back in the 1700s, the sails were made out of cannabis hemp. So that's really cool. We have to understand the history of hemp. It's been used for thousands of years by almost every civilization. And during the age of sail, hemp was very important to the sailing ships because they made the sails out of hemp. They made all the rope and the cordage on these sailing ships out of hemp. Thousands of pounds of hemp on all the sailing ships that were so important for commerce, exploration, warfare. The great armadas of the day had thousands and thousands of pounds of hemp on them. Well, actually, they didn't smoke it, but they were using it, the stalks, for hemp and rope. And you can go to Charlestown, the Charlestown Navy Yard, and the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship in the Navy, it is in Charlestown. You can go aboard it, look at all the rope, and just imagine when that was thousands of pounds of hemp. But a key point is, most of that hemp came from Russia in 16 and 1700s. They grew millions of acres of hemp in Russia, whereas they tried to get colonists to grow it, but we couldn't compete with the Russian hemp. They made better quality hemp. So by the late 1800s, the hemp industry declined in America, and they were only growing a few thousand acres. And then in the 1930s, Reefer Madness rolled around, and they made marijuana illegal with the Marijuana Tax Act, and they just swept hemp under the rug with marijuana. They made it illegal also, even though, you know, it's not a drug, it's not a bad thing, but there were so few farmers growing hemp back then, there was no protest about it. But during World War II, the Japanese invaded the Philippines, and they cut off our Manila hemp supply. And then the armed forces needed hemp for rope, for cordage, for the war effort. So they grew hemp all throughout the Midwest, 150,000 acres. But as soon as the war was over, boom, they made it basically illegal again and put a lot of bureaucracy so that farmers couldn't grow hemp. So, but there's so much great hemp history out there that we really need to do more research into it and study it. We need engineers out there, if we have any engineering people, to invent new machinery to harvest and process hemp. Because marijuana and hemp was illegal for over 70 years, there's been no research and development into equipment to harvest and process the hemp. So we need new machines. That's a great opportunity. We're creating an entire industry from the ground up, and this is very, very difficult. It's a great opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge. We need to look at the tensile strength of hemp. Hemp grows like 10 to 12 feet tall, really tall, and the fiber runs the entire length of the plant. So it's very strong, high